we're about to get into the issue of pursuing justice for young girls who are defiled. We'll get into the issue of, more adult people who are also raped as well. But my guest is a lawyer, Kwabena Nimako. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Yeah. Straight away, if you're confronted with an issue like that, like from yesterday or 2 days ago, the issue of an 11-year-old girl who was defiled twice, actually, the mother went to report at the police station and decided to go on that line. But there's pressure from the police officer who is leading the investigation and family members, including her own father, to take money from the guy's family and let the case die. So how difficult is it? Because we've also heard about prosecutors not able to get enough evidence to pursue the cases. Can you get justice from this?
See, first of all, justice is accessible for all victims who've suffered some crime one way or the other. Yeah, sexual offenses, I know they are rampant now. The last few days we've heard about cases of defilement, which we are all concerned about. When such a case comes up, what the victim or say the mother of the victim or the parent of the victim, they can make a report to the police. They will make a formal complaint. The police will now, if they have any suspect, the police will do their investigations, summon the suspect to their station, caution the suspect, and then it follows like that. That is how it starts. So
it's not a case of when they arrest you, they'll put you behind bars until the case is resolved?
No, before the Supreme Court decision that, there was a case that the
unbailable offense.
Certain offenses were not bailable.
Yeah.
Rape, defilement, murder. But now, per the Supreme Court decision, says that it's unconstitutional to say that some offenses are unbailable. In fact, it's against the human rights of the accused, because a person is not guilty unless he has been proven to be guilty. That's the basis for which offenses become bailable.
So even if you saw the person, and the person is also not denying it, it's a bailable offense.
It has to follow. It's a bailable offense. Pronounces the suspect guilty. At that point, he's a suspect. At that point, he's a suspect. For you may never know. Some people may be under duress to confess to a crime. You can't tell. So it has to go through the processes, the legal processes, for the court to pronounce that person guilty of the offense. And then to your issue about the parent or the victims accepting money from the suspect, see, it depends on the victim. You don't compromise something like this. If you want justice for yourself, are you going to quantify your pain or the crime by taking money? It depends on you. For me, I don't recommend that you do something like that. Let the law take its course. Let the suspect know that what you did is so wrong. Society frowns on it. So serve your sentence or your punishment and never do it again.
There's a story, I think, in one of the newspapers, the Daily Guide or one other newspaper, a 55-year-old who defiled, I think, a 10-year-old, and he got 15 years. How is that? That is not strong punishment, is there? Is there a limit to what the court can slap?
Yes, there's a limit.
Okay.
In defilement, every offense is prescribed by law, and the punishment is also prescribed by law. So the judge is limited as to what punishment he or she can impose on the accused person. Defilement, for instance, the minimum punishment the accused can get is 7 years. 7 years minimum.
Okay.
So depending on the severity of the issue, then the judge will say, okay, what you did is so heinous that no man should have done that. So I'll give you 15 years, or I'll give you 12 years. That is, or 25 years, the maximum sentence for defilement. In fact, sexual offenses, rape, for instance, carries a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 25 years. There's also indecent assault, which is a misdemeanor, that one carries from 6 months to maybe 3 years. So the judges are limited as to the punishment they can impose on the accused person. So no matter how society may perceive the offense to be, the judge has a limit which he can go.
When we say justice, is it the person being put behind bars that is justice?
Justice for sometimes it could have a subjective meaning, and sometimes it could have objective meaning. In criminal crime, for instance, the reason we have criminal laws is that society wants there to be peace. You don't go offending your other neighbor or causing chaos to other persons so that there will be general chaos in the society. And the Republic takes an interest in crimes. You will find that some crimes are in themselves very, very, very serious. Others are not. Say, for instance, assault. Somebody slaps you, and then you consider that it's not something that people will say that this is heinous. But for instance, murder, a man who butchers his wife and then maybe burns her, that's a heinous crime. Those are those are very serious crimes which society doesn't want to happen again. So
I get you. But the other thing that I wanted us to get into is, if it's a crime, so for instance, in this particular case of the defilement, it becomes the states fighting the battle, if you like, on your behalf, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But how do you then withdraw the case?
The law allows that, say for defilement, for instance, you cannot withdraw the case. And I will explain. The reason is that it's a felony. It's a felony. So the state is particular about compromising felonious crimes. When it is a misdemeanor, misdemeanors are crimes which the punishment are minimal, say 3 years. 3 years. Those ones the state allows you to, okay, you would want to go and settle or withdraw the case, fine. Go ahead and withdraw, because they are not aggravated in any sense, or it doesn't really affect, or people don't perceive them to be so serious. But defilement is considered very, very serious, so that if you want to withdraw, I mean, the judge hands it's tied. The law doesn't allow that to happen. But in practice, you would find that some people will compromise that, even though it's against the law, and then withdraw the case.
What's difficult about putting the evidence together? I mean, there's the doctor's reports, and if the doctor's report clearly shows that, you know, the person has been defiled, isn't that a good case? Or it's not enough?
Every offense has some ingredients you have to prove. Defilement, for instance, is not, say, a sex-specific offense. In that, if you look at our law on rape, rape is carnal knowledge of a female who is not less than 16 years. So that's sex-specific. You can only rape a female. So what the prosecution has to prove in that case is the age of the victim, and then the carnal knowledge. Carnal knowledge is simply, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, penetration.
You are.
The vaginal penis penetration that we know. When it comes to defilement, it doesn't matter the sex of the child. It could be a boy or a girl who is less than 16 years. In that case, the victim doesn't need to consent before the prosecution, or the accused cannot be heard to say that the victim agreed. to the act. Consent is irrelevant, because at that age they are considered not to be so mature to understand some of these sexual implications of these carnal knowledge activities. So gathering evidence, the police will have to, the word of the victim, it's one key evidence. because the victim will usually know who did the act to him or her, and then proving that there was indeed carnal knowledge, natural or unnatural, on the victim. So the doctor's report could also say, okay, if there's been some penetration, the doctor's report could prove that carnal knowledge, and if there is the word of the victim as well. So it's a holistic thing in evidence gathering to prove the case.
You know, usually we'll hear that, oh, the case has been dropped because they couldn't gather enough evidence. What can a family in that instance do? Is that the end of the case?
Yeah, they will have to know what evidence they say they can't gather. That's the reason they are dropping the case. Is it the victim not coming forward to say, tell who defiled her or him? Or is it a medical report that they can't get? Or was there no carnal knowledge of the victim? So the family has to question what evidence can they not get in order to move the case forward. And defilement cases are held in chambers. They are not public proceedings where you have other
sessions.
Yes, because of the age of the victim. In fact, sexual offenses are usually held in chambers.
Yeah. I want us to also engage a clinical psychologist on this conversation, because we're mainly looking at remedy, but we're also talking about healing and whether or not these children can ever heal from this. Our clinical psychologist, I'm saying like we're owning him, Seth Asafo, is joining us via Skype. Good morning to you. Thanks for your time. Hello, Seth, if you can hear me. Hi, Seth. Okay, so he can't quite hear me. We're going to re-establish connection with him, and then we'll talk about the healing process as well. Because I'm interested in knowing, can you be healed when justice has not been served, for instance? Should they work hand in hand? Should they go together? But I don't know about you, if you've had any cases that you've pursued. Are lawyers interested in cases like these? Because these are not like ready cash.
Yes, I would say yes, lawyers are interested in cases like these. They are. See, it's the state that prosecutes. It's the state that prosecutes. So that you find that the victims would have the police or the Attorney General's department handling the prosecution for them, and then the defendant or the accused person will have lawyers defending them.
Private lawyers.
Private. Defending them.
Okay.
The lawyers are interested in these cases, so that not if you are not the Attorney General or public prosecutor, you cannot prosecute. That is the law. So
the fact is that these things are not in the family's hands. I mean, it's like it's the state, so the state does everything.
Once you make a report, the state takes over. Or what the family has to do is to make sure that they assist the police in the investigations, and then all the records, all the evidence goes to the state, and the state proceeds.
Can a family or a parent put pressure on the state to do things quickly? I've realized before you come in, I've realized that often they either have to start talking to media about the frustrations. That's when they get some real attention. Otherwise, most of the cases just drag on.
This is Ghana. We have our own system of development, and then pace of development.
Yeah.
And then we know how our machineries work. So I would say that sometimes the cases would drag. Some of the police would be sluggish, and then the victims would have to assist or push them to do their work. But it depends on the police officer or the prosecution handling the matter. It all depends. But generally speaking, my observation, the justice system sometimes is quite slow.
Is it sometimes? It is always slow. Let's speak to Seth Asafo now. Hopefully he can hear me. He's a clinical psychologist. He's joining us. Good morning to you. Thank you again for your time. I was asking if a child, a 10-year-old, 9-year-old, 11-year-old, can heal from being defiled when justice has not been served?
Yes, they can heal. It just takes a process. It depends on the kind of help they get and the kind of support systems they get after the procedure. So they can get healing.
Where does the healing begin from? Where does it start from? In the cases that we've heard about, for instance, the 9-year-old at in the central region, it got a lot of attention. So the MP, the minister, journalists, you know, when all these people are around somebody who's gone through something like that, how do they begin the healing process?
The most important thing to realize is for the healing process to be effective, it's not about ministers and assemblymen coming to your aid per se, but it's about those that you trust already. Okay, now it also becomes more complicated if the person who committed the act was someone you were close to in the first place. You understand? So depending on who, I mean, the process of healing is not an automatic thing. You say step 1, step 2, step 3. No, there are a number of things that you have to consider. But generally, having family support, like close family support, is more important. There have been scenarios where people have been defiled, and families have decided to keep it. The families have decided not to bring it out, and so you have people who start to feel as if their families don't even care about them.
Hello.
Because of the fact that they hit it or they say, "Oh no, let's not." Hello, can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah. No, the connection has gone a bit bad. Kindly speak up again. Let's see. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I think it's getting better.
Hello?
Let's work with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, I'm saying that it's not such a thing about the minister and the assemblyman. It starts generally with the people who are closest to the victim. Okay, and it involves. You see, normally when things like this happen, people's trust is broken, and so we have to first build the trust back in order to get into their scope of mind and work with them. I hope you understand what I mean.
I get you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but what does finding justice do to somebody who is healing, or even somebody who is healed?
It depends on the kind of justice. See, in most cases, when somebody goes through such a traumatic event, the kind of justice they want might not be the justice that they'll get. You know what I mean? So it's not a thing about getting justice will make me heal, but it's a thing about working with the person to feel or find a sense of trust for the world again, and not the justice per se. If you ask a lot of people who've been through such a traumatic event, they tell you, I wish that person was no longer alive. So they wish justice would be death, but that's not something that they get. So it's not a thing about justice making them heal. It does play a part, but justice in itself, if it's unmeaningful to the person or the victim, becomes a bit useless.
So yeah, sure. I was citing an example of a newspaper publication today that's saying a 10-year-old who was defiled by a 55-year-old, and I think that's the father of this child, is going in for 15 years, 15 years. And the comment I made after reading that story was that this is not like a strong punishment. What does it say? You know, like if you've gone through this experience and you've seen a court slap 15-year sentence, or let's just say I've been educated, so the maximum sentence of 25 years. How does somebody who has gone through this traumatic experience, how does the person feel when they see a publication like that?
Well, It's a very subjective process. I cannot say for a fact how they would feel, because it depends. Everybody has a way they deal with these things. So there is no one way they feel. But if you ask me how I would feel, I say that's very annoying. I say they deserve more punishment than that.
It's a shame. But I'll come back to you. Just hang in there with us. I've got Kwabena Nimako, who is a lawyer, in studio. The question of beyond the condemnation of acts of sexual violence, what next? That's what we're trying to talk to him in terms of getting a legal remedy. Does it come with compensation in terms of money? What you've seen, does it come with like a relocation? Because sometimes the psychologist will tell you you've got to change environment and things like that. What does the state give you?
Okay, I'm not sure if you're asking whether upon the conviction of the accused.
Yeah, what can a victim get beyond the accused being punished?
Convicted.
Yes.
The law allows the victim to inform the courts that, listen, could you get the accused or the convict to compensate me for some maybe expenses I may have incurred, for instance, in hospital expenses, or trying to recover anything incidental expenses as a result of the convict action. I think that's how far the judge can go in respect of the compensation. But beside that, asking for relocation, that I don't think the laws permit the judge to do such an act.
Amazing. Seth, if you can hear me, there's a story that I was told of yesterday, and it was totally heartbreaking. So here's a 9-year-old who was defiled. In the process of the accuser pulling out his penis, he then pulls out the girl's intestines in the process, because this is a very fragile person. And then they try to operate on the girl. I mean, so all these, the police is aware, but they try to operate on the girl twice. And then finally, an NGO steps in. You know, so that's how come we all now, almost everybody knows about. I'm not sure if you've heard about this particular instance. For somebody like that, I mean, what is going on? Like, even with the families involved, I need a bit of understanding here. Hello, Seth? Okay, I think our connection is going bad again. So, but we've got to end it there somehow. Our clinical psychologist, Seth Asaf, for joining us via Skype. Apologies that we didn't have a strong connection, but Kwabena Nimako is a lawyer, and I want you to educate all of us, for people who have even grown-ups, because we also heard about an 18-year-old who was raped and hanged, actually, to die, except that by God's grace she didn't.
She survived. Yeah,
and she survived. Do you need a special kind of courage to go ahead, even when somebody is saying, oh, I'll compensate you maybe like 100,000 Ghana cedis or something like that? Is money ever better than seeing a court pronounce judgments on an accused?
I think it's a societal perception that we have about sexual offenses. When you, for instance, know a person who has been raped, I mean, even if you may have empathized with that person, you would have to put a certain stigma on that person. You know, that stigma may affect the individual. So, okay, I don't want people to know that I have been raped. I can't go through this. I'm already traumatized. I want to keep this a secret. So no matter how you may try to get this thing, say, if you go to court and then get the proceedings done in chambers, for some reason it may come out. And some victims may not handle the perception or the aftermath of the issues coming out. For instance, you have this issue talking about, say, this 18-year-old who's been raped. Let's say the more she hears about it, she may have a certain feeling or uneasiness about the situation. She may not want to hear about it anymore and wish that social media everywhere people will stop talking about it. So it depends on the individual and how the individual is able to cope with trauma and survive. I believe this is a field for the clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
And then again, he said something interesting. For the victims, so the process of healing, sometimes it's not about the justice involved. It depends on the victim. So that's why I said that justice could be subjective and objective.
Yeah.
A victim will wish that the person would die, but that the law doesn't prescribe such a punishment for that sexual offense. So that if the person, they don't pronounce a death sentence on the person, the victim's, okay, I didn't get justice. Some will wish that, okay, you serve your sentence, I'll find my process of healing. It may be the victim could be a relative, the victim's father, and then the mother could say, this is your father who has been providing for us, even though he's done something extremely stupid and heinous. Let it go, and then we'll find a process of healing. So it's a combination of factors, and then it's dependent on the circumstances of the victim.
Yeah. Finally, if you're courageous enough, and we found a lot of courageous people who want to go the legal way, and in the face of people showing money to them and saying, I can pay your medical bills and then I can give you enough compensation, they still decide to pursue, what the law prescribes. How would you say such a person should brace themselves? Because it means that the case can go on for years. Am I right?
Yes, when you say yes, it could be a year, it could be 2. But I don't think it might go beyond 5 or 6 years. But eventually, it will come to a stop. If you're willing to go all that miles, you just have to be ready to face it. And then be ready to brace yourself for. Some defense lawyers are very astute. Brace yourself for. Sometimes they may paint you to be, in rape cases usually it's the word of the victim against the accused person. If the accused says that you consented to the act, there's no rape. If you consented, you agreed to the act, there is no rape. So it's usually the word of the victim against the word of the accused. So that if the defense are good enough to paint the accused or the victim to be somebody who likes to give out sex, then it becomes a problem for the victim, and the victim may say that she didn't get justice, and at the end of the day, why didn't I even accept the money?
Yeah.
And then let sleeping dogs lie. So it's always something that is subjective, how the victim wants to handle the situation. But I don't recommend that you would quantify your dignity and then accept money. I don't recommend doing that.
Yeah, I said finally, but if people are pointing fingers at you, if you live in a small community where everybody knows your story, for instance, this 18-year-old, I think because of the circumstance, because she blacked out, and so word spread and everybody now knows what happened to her. Can you take any legal action against people who point fingers at you and talk behind your back?
No. No.
Okay. All right. I'm grateful for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me as well.
Yeah, thank you. Our lawyer, Kwabena Nimako, join us with that perspective in terms of what is available to you, really. And I think maybe the last issue about you have to get ready and know what is in there. He's touched on something that we hardly think about. The other person that is accused, he also has lawyers, and sometimes they can be really wild. So you've got to be ready if you want to fight the battle. But we ask for God's grace, really, for any person who's gone through this horrible experience. Let's talk about something that would happen right after the AM show this morning, the 12th West African Power Pool Forum. It starts at 9:30 a.m. Today, the event will be held at the Sweet Spirit Alisa Hotel. It will be live here on JoyNews. We'll bring you live coverage, so you've got to stay on. We will tell you how things are getting ready at the Sweet Spirit Alisa Hotel.